The Resident Evil 2 remake released earlier this year has been hailed as a modern horror masterpiece, recapturing the original's tense atmosphere while still making for a fresh experience. It perfected the style popularized by the series' fourth entry, revitalized an old story by the incredible RE engine, and most importantly, showed that Resident Evil 2 had aged really, really well. Resident Evil 2's generation, the 32-bit generation, was a major time of growth for the video games industry. Developers struggled to update their 2D hits into 3D builds, with some genres making the leap into the third dimension more easily than others. While horror games were nothing new by the time the Sega Saturn and Sony PlayStation had launched, it was during their generation that the genre solidified itself into something widely identifiable. Survival horror, as it was dubbed, became the brand of horror. Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Alone in the Dark, and all the imitators that followed defined the horror landscape for nearly 2 full console generations. Though resource management and fixed camera angles never fully went out of style, tastes changed and so did the genre, the founding members moving to more action-oriented gameplay in the years following. While the 8 and 16-bit console generations have spawned their fair share of independent platformers, fighting games, and RPGs, the only genre to have enthusiastically adopted the 32-bit style is horror. While the Resident Evil 2 remake sticks closely to the pacing and layout of its inspiration, there's an entire subgenre of horror which not only seeks to emulate the design of the 32-bit era, but also to look like genuine products of it. The following 3 titles pull inspiration from the horror of decades past, offering varied and unique samples of what made the genre so captivating in its digital infancy. The aptly named Back in 1995 begins with the protagonist, Kent, committing to a perilous journey across a deserted cityscape. The game's opening minutes play out more like parody than horror, distilling the combat, fixed camera, and key collecting survival horror tropes down to their simplest form. It feels very much like something you've played before, albeit with even messier textures and more primitive polygonal architecture than anything running on mid-90s hardware. It's only once you reach the final tower that Kent's quest, and subsequently your illusions as to the game's goal, begin to crumble. A sudden ending places the player back at the game's start, once again spying the mysterious tower in the distance. While some players may simply quit at this point, dismissing the game as a dirty trick preying on nostalgia, those who venture forth into the Dark City once more will find something very wrong with the game world. It has begun to degrade, the already scant story withered thanks to the absent NPCs and streamlined exploration. It becomes all too easy, save for the intense feeling of paranoia garnered by running and rerunning Back in 1995's relatively small floor plan over and over. Back in 1995 channels the sadness of memory, forcing players into familiar and tired routines. More jagged and pixelated than any game it emulates, Back in 1995 feels like an impressionist interpretation of early survival horror, offering fleeting glimpses of familiarity to those who were there when it all happened. It frightens a specific demographic, turning nostalgia into confrontation. The style of first-person exploration pioneered by games like Sentient and Defcon 5 made for something of an interesting, if unintentional, horror genre spin-off. Exploring quiet labyrinths with objectives either oblique or unclear made the game suspenseful, even uncomfortable, to play. While it may be a stretch to reference games like Defcon 5 as Paratopic's inspiration, the titles do share a few key concepts. Tasked with delivering a set of video cassette tapes, Paratopic's story unfolds via a series of disjointed narrative reveals. Much of the storytelling is left for players to discover on their own through dialogue choices, scene exploration, and points of interactivity. Though unsettling and confusing, Paratopic's story proves captivating for a number of reasons. First, the level of choice and interactivity inspires players to question every single action they make in the short scenes of gameplay. Second, the game's methods of disorientation achieved through both artistic design and character interaction make it hard to piece together a cohesive narrative after 1, or even 2, playthroughs. With no save system in place, and the game only running about 40 minutes in length, Paratopic captures players' interest by encouraging a dangerous kind of curiosity. While the game could have earned a place on this list for aesthetics alone, its smart refinement and expansion of the first-person exploration genre make it much more than a token addition. Paratopic highlights just how bizarre and unintentionally scary the 32-bit era remains thanks to both the restraints of presentation and larger-than-life design ambitions. Vaccine traps players inside a massive mansion filled with zombies and biomutants. The goal of Vaccine is to, not surprisingly, find a vaccine and cure your comrade. On paper, it reads like classic Resident Evil. In pictures, it looks like classic Resident Evil. However, Resident Evil, this is not. Vaccine is horror without construct. While the game successfully boils survival horror down to its core ingredients, rebuilding them into an arcade roguelike experience, it does so at the sacrifice of tension and atmosphere. Games have a 30-minute time limit, no save system, and randomized floor plans. Vaccine's challenge lies in risk management more than route preparation, and its scares in the threat of dead ends rather than choreography. Vaccine's choice to recreate only the base gameplay staples and setting of Resident Evil mean it also lacks the charm and suspense crafted through narrative. However, Vaccine does succeed in showcasing just how well this gameplay style has aged, even in its most primitive form. The tank controls slow progression, forcing players to inch forward should an enemy lay waiting around a blind corner. Limited health and combat resources, or locked doors, sometimes force players to reroute their path, noting where to come back when better equipped. Vaccine's RPG-like upgrade system also gives the game a nice modern touch without sacrificing its retro charm. It isn't the culmination of blurry textures, fixed camera angles, and limited resources together, nor one aspect alone, that has made early survival horror so endearing. However, what these three games highlight is how any given aspect of the genre as it existed in the mid to late 90s could have been expanded in a completely different direction. Had game companies not always been at the mercy of chasing bigger and better technology, or forced to fine-tune their games to better suit the masses rather than the niche, 32-bit horror may have diverged down some pretty avant-garde avenues. Or perhaps these games could only exist here and now, some 2.5 decades later after nostalgia had gotten the better of the developers. Vaccine, Paratopic, and Back in 1995 are just some of the notable titles in this new emerging genre of 32-bit interactive horror. Who knows where the genre could head next, or where nostalgia could take the next generation of horror fans.
Nothing dies down